Hey people, happy Monday and welcome back to another episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. We've got a fair bit to get into as usual today. We're going to talk Mikel Merino. Has he been misprofiled by some of us, given that he scored a hat-trick for Spain last night away in Turkey? We're going to discuss the future of Gabriel Jesus and we're going to discuss Arsenal's big summer transfer window regret. All of that, plus some of your comments, some of your thoughts from the live chat to come on today's episode of the pod. Let's get into it. Hey, everybody, how are we doing? Welcome back to another live episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. With me, your host, Harry Symeou. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you've all had a good weekend. Hope you've all enjoyed the international break weekend. Obviously, Arsenal return to action next weekend, which is exciting because, you know, after that result at Liverpool, which we've all been stewing on for such a long time now, I don't know about you, but I'm desperate to see the boys back in action and hopefully getting 3 points on the board and moving forward and just lifting the mood around the club again. Look, I think overall, I'm feeling pretty good about the upcoming, well, I say upcoming, it's already started, but about this current season. I was frustrated by some of the things that we saw against Liverpool. I was frustrated with what I thought was a lack of bravery at times. I think we were right in some senses to be cautious and to be careful. But at the same time, I felt, as I've said many, many times since that game, that we needed to smell the blood. We needed to understand earlier in the game that Liverpool weren't at it. We needed to understand that there was an opportunity for us. And we needed to go and grab it with both hands. And we didn't. And we sat idle a little bit. And in the end, a moment of brilliance from Dominic Szoboszlai decided that game. And that has led to many conversations, many discussions, and many debates about whether or not Arsenal are too negative, whether or not Mikel Arteta's side are too drilled, to the point where that spontaneity and that license to then, you know, read a situation, suss it out for yourself and go and take it on has been essentially taken away from this group. The debate centers a lot around the manager, which I understand, but I also think the players have to take a bit of responsibility there as well. And I think we're in this world nowadays where it's funny because we always blame the manager for stuff. Like, and I'm talking about generally here. Take the Arsenal Liverpool debate out of it for a minute. When a team doesn't perform, when a player misses a chance, when a team doesn't show the required commitment, when a team lacks desire, when a team is rolled over very, very easily by an opponent, the first thing that everybody does is go, well, it's on the manager. You know, team doesn't play well for the manager. Oh, the manager's lost the dressing room. Team doesn't take responsibility on the pitch to go make things happen from a creative standpoint. It must be the manager's instruction. Now, obviously, the manager has an influence, and obviously, the manager plays a big role and a big part. But I do think we overblame not just the manager, but others as well. Like, for example, you know, if you go back to certain transfers, you know, people would have sort of pointed the finger at Edu and blamed Edu when we don't actually know whether or not that was Edu's decision, or if it was Edu blocking something or not willing to move forward with something, or if it was the ownership saying, look, we just don't want to spend that kind of money on that particular player. We don't know. And we had this discussion a little bit yesterday when we talked about the whole William Saliba injury thing, because I had a few people messaging me on X and stuff. Well, X has become the biggest cesspit, by the way, on the internet. Like, I'm using it increasingly less and less. That's a good time actually to plug the fact that I'm on Instagram. I'm quite active on Instagram at the moment. You can follow me on there at what's my handle, Harry_Symeou. So come over, give us a follow on Instagram. You can also find me on TikTok as well. Yes, I am down with the kids and I'm on TikTok, and on there my handle is just at Harry Symeou. I'm using those platforms more and more, and I'm using X less and less because I just find like it's just full of people that want to have an argument. Like, there was someone that came at me the other day and said, you know, why aren't you blaming Mikel Arteta, or why didn't you challenge Mikel Arteta for allowing William Saliba to start when he picked up a problem in the warm-up? As I said on yesterday's pod, I wasn't in the post-match press conference. I didn't go to Anfield. My wife gave birth a few days before. I was at home, and I haven't been to a press conference since. So, like, you know, it's just a classic example of how people like just make things up in their minds about what you should say, when you should say it, without taking any consideration. Like if you'd seen a video of me asking a question and I asked a different question, and one that you felt was not very challenging and not in line with maybe what the fans want to hear, then by all means, like I might disagree with you, but by all means, you know, pull me up on it. I'd love to hear people's thoughts. But like just people having a go at you for not asking a question in a press conference that you weren't even in, it just sums up what online discourse looks like these days. So, and I said this around that subject as well. Like, you can blame Arteta if you want to blame Arteta. You can blame Saliba if you want to blame Saliba. You can blame the medical staff if you want to blame the medical staff. But the truth is that none of us know how that went down. Did William Saliba come off from the warm-up, tell everybody in the dressing room that he was absolutely fine and that he wanted to start the game? In which case, you're going to trust your player and you're going to let him go out there and do that. Did Mikel Arteta and him have a massive bust-up? And Saliba stamped his feet and said, no, I'm going out there and I'm playing. In which case, Mikel Arteta showed no backbone and let William Saliba go and play. And now we're paying the price for that. Like, these are all made up scenarios. That's the point I'm trying to make. Nobody actually knows how that conversation went. So you're entitled to blame whoever you want. And you can choose to blame this person or that person or their mother or their brother or their sister or their father, whatever you want to do. But it's the way that people do it with such like conviction. Like, it's definitely his fault. Well, you don't know that. And you know what? Over the course of the last few years, especially, I've come to realize that a lot of the time, you know, people need to just not keep their opinions to themselves, because everybody's entitled to an opinion. But I think if you are going to go out there and have really strong opinions on stuff, I think you've always got to do it from a position where you're open-minded and willing to have your mind changed. Because when you're doing what we do, you know, what football YouTubers, podcasters, broadcasters, journalists do, which is a lot of the time provide opinions without the full information and without the full context and understanding exactly what went on. You know, you can have those views. I'm not saying people can't have their views, but you've got to be open-minded to the fact that you might be wrong. And the way that people want to allocate blame with such certainty, I don't understand it. Maybe it's just some of the experiences I've had in life where I look at it and I go, well, I thought it was that. Actually, it turned out that I was wrong and I didn't know the full story and I didn't understand the full context. Maybe that's humbled me a little bit. I don't know. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. I realize we've been rambling on about that for a little bit, but we got a few other bits to get into today. I want to talk about Mikel Merino, who was brilliant for Spain last night. A hat-trick in Spain's 6-0 win out in Turkey. And you know what the irony of it is? And I guess it kind of shows what I know about football. I was speaking to my brother earlier in the day, and he said to me, is there any decent football on tonight? Like, is there anything we should watch? Like, it's international break. You're always kind of scraping the barrel, aren't you? You're trying to pick out a game that you think is going to be the most interesting. And I said, do you know what game jumped out to me? Spain-Turkey, or Turkey-Spain, I should say. I feel like Turkey-Spain is a game that has the potential to be quite interesting. It was interesting, but it was a very one-sided interesting, wasn't it, in the end, because Spain completely and utterly destroyed them. They really, really did. And Mikel Merino played a massive part in that. And we'll come on to Mikel Merino in a little bit. I want that to be our kind of main topic today. There's a couple of other bits, though, that I want to touch on. I want to start with a piece that came out this morning from The Athletic. I think it was the final transfer piece. I think that's how they billed it when they published it. And they talked a little bit about Arsenal's, Arsenal's summer window. They highlighted that, according to their figures, Arsenal had spent £254 million and had only brought in around about £8.9 million the other way. Now, Arsenal stand to increase that number because there's a few loans with options to buy. There's the Jakub Kiwior deal, which means that we're going to get paid a little bit further down the line. So the figures aren't quite as bad as they look there. And if you're one of those net spend guys, you'll be looking at this: £254 million spent, £8.9 million received. and you'd be having kittens, right? So we got to understand that received figure is going to increase a little bit, not a hell of a lot, but a little bit. And if you want to be accurate in your analysis, that you got to factor that in. The piece goes on to talk about how Arsenal will be disappointed with their inability to sell for decent money. And it also highlights that the deal that saw Sambi Lokonga move to Hamburg is only worth an initial fee of about 300,000 euros. In fact, slightly less than that. And that's interesting because I remember reading reports at the time, and I remember saying to you guys, not because I was discrediting anyone's reporting, but I remember saying to you guys, if that's true, that's really good. But it's a big if, because I never felt that Arsenal were ever going to get close to the sort of 10 million euro fee that had been suggested for Sambi Lokonga previously. Maybe we're going to get close to that if every single thing goes right. You know, if he plays tons of games, if he scores goals, if he helps them qualify for Europe, if he helps them this, if he helps them that, blah, 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 you know, who knows? But we were always going to have to take a loss, and we were going to have to swallow a pretty low transfer fee when it came to Sambi Lokonga, because ultimately Arsenal made it clear a number of years ago now that he doesn't have a future in North London, that he doesn't have a future at Emirates Stadium. And so, you know, we've been in this position with him for a while. We hoped that Sevilla were going to make the deal permanent. Obviously, that didn't materialize for a number of reasons, because, you know, Sevilla's financial situation, I don't think allowed that. Also, I don't think he was particularly brilliant during that time, and that obviously would have made them think twice about whether, given their financial situation, they were willing to kind of put that sort of money down and make the deal permanent. Anyway, for whatever reason, it didn't work out. So we were always going to take a lot less for Sambi Lokonga. But the point about selling, I don't think we should dwell on it too much this time around, because the club have shown us that even without selling for significant amounts of money, they were willing this summer to go and invest quite big. And so I don't think it's something that we should go on and on and on about for the remainder of, you know, the year, and that we should continue discussing, you know, throughout the course of the campaign. But my point here is that, you know, it is something that's there in the background, and it is something that's existed there in the background. Now, Rome wasn't built in a day. Andrea Berta wasn't going to come in, make us more effective, more efficient in terms of buy-in, and magic up these unbelievable offers from other clubs for some of our fringe players. I think we were always going to end up, you know, having another summer like this one, because when we made the list, didn't we, at the start of the summer, of the players that could potentially exit, I remember going through it and I remember saying, yeah, we're not going to get much for him. We're not going to get much for him. We're not going to get much for him. We knew that. So again, people like to, you know, point blame at people and allocate blame to people. Who you allocating the blame to here? Like, you can't allocate the blame to Andrea Berta, who's been in the door 5 minutes. People will point at Mikel Arteta and say, well, he devalued these players because he bought them, didn't use them, blah, 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 blah. What do you want him to do? Pick a shit team because he wants to maintain the value of those players so that some people online come the summer can go, oh, we're great sellers. Like, is that what you want? Like, it's mad to me. Like, it's strange to me. I don't think it works like that, right? You can't say that you want the manager to be winning everything. You want him to be competing at the highest level all the time. You know, you want him to have a solid, steady, regular, and very effective team. But then you're worried about him saying to people like Lokonga, go out on loan, you're not quite at the level, or to Fabio Vieira, go out on loan, you're not quite at the level. If you want to blame him as a part of the group that signed the guy, fine, no problem. But there's multiple facets here. That's my point. Okay, that's my point. I think what Arsenal are really bad at, and I'll criticize Arsenal here because, you know, this is genuinely my opinion, and I want to share this with you guys. What I think Arsenal are really, really bad at is loaning players out to the right places, loaning players to clubs whereby they stand a chance of succeeding, where they stand a chance of showing what they're capable of, what they can do. and therefore increasing their value in the process. Okay. Some of the loans, for example, like Porto taking Fabio Vieira, that made sense to me. Send him back to where he came from, send him back to familiar surroundings, send him to a club where he's loved and adored, where he knows the league, where he understands the culture, the language, and that should, in theory, see him thrive. That one made sense. But you go back over the years, and there have been a lot of loans that Arsenal have sort of overseen, presided over. And I get that you've got to have the loan offer there, to kind of make those deals happen. But there's just been a lot where players have gone to places, and I've just looked at it and gone, you're never going to succeed there. It's not working. It's never going to work from the beginning, from the start. And so how do we expect to increase those players' value? Just on this, there's a few interesting comments in the chat. Let's have a look. Oki says the devalue argument, it has merit. There's a ways to treat players who you don't want in your squad anymore. Put them in the shop window. Arteta freezes them out. It only ends with low sales. But again, so what do you do? What do you do? Would you have played Fabio Vieira loads last season? Would you have brought Sambi Lokonga back at the start of the season and played him? Would you have kept Reece Nelson on the substitutes bench and had him sitting way down the pecking order rather than letting him go out to Fulham? Now, it was unfortunate for Reece Nelson because he picked up an injury and there's not a lot anybody can do about that. But I think it's all well and good saying that we devalue the players. And clearly there is some issue there. But where I'm stuck is I don't know what the solution is. And if I don't know what the solution is, or don't even think I know what the solution is, what am I doing sitting here slagging people off and criticizing people? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, okay, Oki, I want to know, when you say there's ways to treat players who you don't want in your squad anymore, what would you do differently? What would you do differently? I want to hear from you in the comments, and we'll come back to that. Martin says Arteta gets blamed for past purchases, but Berta gets credit for the summer. Shows a huge bias, guys. Yeah, because either we're going to draw a line now with Andrea Berta coming in and say all the transfers are on Andrea Berta rather than Mikel Arteta, and we're going to give Andrea Berta all the praise in the world. But then in the future, when some of these players don't work out, which will happen because no club gets every single transfer right, are we then going to say, well, Arteta had nothing to do with that because it was all about Berta? Like, there's got to be consistency in the way you judge whether something was a success or failure or not, and then who you pin that on. I think you've got to be realistic and understand that these are group decisions. These are not decisions solely made by Berta. These are not decisions solely made by Mikel Arteta. They are group decisions. What else have we got here? The robots will eat you. Look at Martinelli. Are we doing what's good for potential profit? Will more left wing back shifts under this manager increase his value? Well, like, again, okay, so look, we've been having the debate about Martinelli for ages. Is he good enough? Should he be playing? The vast majority of Arsenal fans, I think, right now, will tell you that they're unsure about whether Martinelli's at the level. So what do? Do you keep playing him every single week, even when we know he's out of form, and do that because you're scared of devaluing him, but you're weakening the team? Or do you take Gabriel Martinelli out of the side, starting this weekend, put Ebereze in there, and have Martinelli coming on and off the bench and becoming more of a squad player? Because if you want to prioritize the good of the team in the here and now, by default, taking Martinelli out decreases his value. So that's what I'm trying. You've just demonstrated the point that I've made to perfection, better than I ever could. You've highlighted exactly what I'm on about. If you want the good of the team and you want the team to prosper, you need to pick the best players. You can't be sitting there when it comes to making a decision about who's best to play at the weekend and worrying about what that player's market value is going to look like in 6 months' time if you do not pick him for this game. That's where, as a manager, you've got to prioritize the good of the team in the here and now. And so people keep saying, we put players out in the cold and we don't use them and whatever. That's because we don't feel that they're good enough. And if they're not good enough and they play and they perform below the standard that's expected and required, the same people will be online going, why is Mikel picking him? Why is Mikel playing him? So do you see the hypocrisy? Okay, I'm not saying that we're perfect. I'm not saying that there aren't things that we can do better. I'm not saying that Mikel Arteta doesn't have shortcomings. I'm not saying that Andrea Berta doesn't have shortcomings. I'm not saying that things that the club do overall are all perfect, rosy and dandy, right? My point is that this is not cut and dry, man. This is not cut and dry. What else have we got? Poster Boy says, Chiesa at Liverpool has not played all of last season, but his value isn't as low as our players because of man management. When he comes on, he still feels a part of the team. What value does Chiesa have these days? What value did Chiesa have before Liverpool signed him? Nothing, pretty much. Chiesa went from being the most exciting player at European Championships for Italy, where he was unbelievable, to a player that Liverpool rolled the dice on and have barely used since. How many goals has he got? 1, 2? Come on, man. That's a lazy example. It's a lazy example. What else have we got? Paul James says Martinelli, just on the subject of him, he looks freer when he plays for Brazil as his focus is on attacking and not defending. And that I agree with. And that is a debate about the way that you deploy your players and the way that you utilize them and what you demand of them. And those debates, I'm absolutely here for. I'm absolutely here for that debate. I think it's an interesting debate. Okay. Let's take a couple more comments actually before we move on, because this subject has seen the chat box pop off in a way that I didn't really expect it to be honest. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't done so already, leave us a like on the video. There's over 500 of you with us live right now on this Monday morning. So leave us a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new. It really, really does help. If you're listening to us on Apple or Spotify, please do leave us a review. All of that stuff is really, really helpful and important. And remember, you can check us out as well on Patreon, patreon.com/The Chronicles of a Gooner. And we're kicking off some new features over on Patreon this week. So now's as good a time as any to sign up. You can check out video analysis of our first 3 games, the games against United, Leeds and Liverpool, all covered over on our Patreon page with some video analysis. So go over there and check that out. And as I say, we've got loads more coming your way on the Patreon side of things. So go over and check it out. Let's go back into the chat. I was going to take a break, but let's go back into the chat because you guys are really sort of getting into this debate and really sort of starting to sort of get into the swing of things. Fujian says Martinelli, by playing badly and not performing, has devalued himself. Now, I don't think it's that cut and dry with Martinelli personally. Okay, I think with somebody like Martinelli, there is something to be said for his performances. There's something to be said for the way he's being utilized. There's something to be said for the tactical instruction and how that then impacts on his ability to play his best game. Again, it's like a 3-4 pronged thing, right? There's a lot of factors and a lot of facets that you need to discuss. But the reason I've highlighted that comment from Fujian is because that is a point that's been completely missed when we've been discussing, how it is that Arsenal supposedly devalue players. If a player does not perform, there's jack shit you can do about their value tanking, because part of it is on them. And that's why, again, football is so complex and complicated, because there's so many factors. Let's take this one from Ike, who says, based on what you know about Arteta, the data available to him and the eye test, why does Arteta insist on starting Odegaard instead of giving chances to others? He was ruthless in casting Tierney aside. So again, I don't agree with Martin Odegaard playing every game when he's going through these difficult patches of form. And I certainly feel stronger about that now that we've got Eze, for example, now that Nwaneri's a year older, now that we've got those different options, now that we've got a proper centre forward, and when Kai Havertz returns, he can play just off the striker as well. I'm certainly more open-minded now than I was a year ago to the idea of giving Martin Odegaard a breather, letting him go and find his sort of feet again, taking him out of the spotlight a little bit. But if I'm trying to get into the head of Mikel Arteta, and let me be clear, this is not my opinion, this is what I believe his opinion is. I think he looks at Odegaard and he sees someone who embodies so many of the values that he tries to instill in his teams. Hard work, good pressing ability, commitment, communication. I think he sees all of those things in Martin Odegaard. He sees so much that he made him captain and he trusts in him. And I think he knows that the rest of the group trust in him because he talked about that sort of polling that took place behind the scenes where, again, Martin Odegaard came out on top, etc., etc. I think it's about the bigger picture with Odegaard. I think everybody knows that he's not at his brilliant best at the moment and that his form's dropped off a little bit. You'd have to be silly not to realize that or to see that. We can all see it. But I think Mikel Arteta still values so much of what he brings to the table to the point where he's willing to sort of watch him play through that. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Let's have a roll through the chat once more before we move on. Juan Lewis says, I'm interested to hear your takes on Arteta's tactics. I feel he has evolved again this season. What is your take? Yeah, I think he has evolved it again this season. I think we're trying to be a little bit more direct. Has it really worked yet? Have we really clicked yet? I would argue no. Despite putting 5 past leads, I don't think we've clicked in attack just yet. And I'm patient about it right now, but I won't be if this continues for a long period of time, because unfortunately in this league, you can't afford to fall behind. You can't afford to lose ground, at any point really, because we know how competitive things are. My thoughts on Arteta's tactics are that over the last few years, we've seen multiple evolutions. And in those evolutions, I think we've seen a shift from the swashbuckling attacking football we saw in the first year that we challenged for the Premier League title to this more pragmatic approach that we see now. Clearly, some experiences along the way have shaped Mikel Arteta's view on how we should approach the biggest games. And I think you're seeing the repercussions of that in the way that we play now. We are competitive. There's no question about that. And because we are competitive, he'll always argue back that actually what he's doing is right, because we are now going to places like Anfield and we are very, very difficult to beat. So I do think that there's been a shift from a more attack-minded brand of football to a more pragmatic brand of football. And it's not necessarily my preference. It's not how I want to see the game played. But ultimately, it comes down to results, doesn't it? Because if you win playing that way, like Jose Mourinho used to, and like many others before him, Max Allegri, etc., nobody cares. Nobody's going to sit there and moan about it. No fan of that football club is going to say, I'm not going to celebrate winning the league. I'm not going to celebrate winning this cup or that European trophy because I didn't agree with the style of football. Ultimately, it's a results business. And if you get the results, the tactics become a side part. But right now, because we've yet to get over the line and achieve those things, the tactics are under the spotlight. And I think it's a question that people are asking themselves now, and it's a fair question, of do we believe that playing this way, we can achieve those things? And I've got my doubts. I've got my doubts about whether Arsenal can win the Premier League without taking the handbrake off a little bit. I've got my doubts about whether Arsenal can go all the way in Europe without being a little bit more brave. Like, I feel all of those things like everybody else. I'm human, and first and foremost, I'm an Arsenal fan. Not before I'm a human, but you know what I mean. Like, I get all that. I understand that. And I've got no problem, by the way, with people questioning those things. I just think that there's other things that people are sort of queuing up to have a moan about that they haven't actually thought through. Like the devaluing players thing. Think it through. What do you do if the player's not performing? Do you play them because you're scared of devaluing them? So you're playing them because the club want their asset to be worth more money, but you as a manager who's going to be judged ultimately at the end of the day on results, you're not getting the best out of your team because you're utilizing someone that isn't good enough in their current form. you got to think about it. There's multiple angles that you can come at those debates and those discussions from. But look, really interesting debate, really interesting chat. Let's take a really short pause. When we come back, we're going to talk Gabriel Jesus, we're going to talk Mikel Merino, and we'll take some more of your thoughts and questions from the live chat. If you haven't done so already, don't forget, leave a like on the video, not in the chat box, but on the video itself. Subscribe as well to the channel if you are brand spanking new, and if you're listening to us on Apple or Spotify, leave us a review. Right, short pause. When we come back, we're talking Jesus and we're talking Mikel Merino.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner. Like and subscribe.
That's right, baby. You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner. Like and subscribe. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Gabriel Jesus. There was a line about him in the Athletics piece this morning. They said that if he can prove his fitness by the time the January window comes around, Gabriel Jesus could be earmarked for a sale. Now, this makes sense. You know, he's had multiple serious injuries. I think there are doubts about whether or not Gabriel Jesus can ever be the player that he was because of those injuries and because of how much his game in particular, I think, relies on sharpness, quick turns, and that sort of thing. You do wonder if those knee injuries have just completely and utterly, reduced and maybe even taken away his powers completely. And if that's going to make him half as effective a player as he was. I've always liked Gabriel Jesus because I think he's a really talented footballer. I think he brought a lot to the team when he first arrived. And I think there was a point last season where he came into the side and did really well and looked like, he was starting to get back to his best. And then his knee went, the other one. And that, for me, was probably the end of Gabriel Jesus' Arsenal career. I think it's right that we're considering a sale. I think it's right to consider moving him on. As much as my heart wants him to stay, if we're talking about the club needing to be ruthless and needing to be better with sales, then you keep a hold of Gabriel Jesus, you build him back up, you give him a few appearances here and there, you get him back into the picture, back into the shop window, essentially, and then you move him on. That's the right thing to do. I'm not, as I say, not massively surprised to read that this morning, but it did tug at my heartstrings a little bit because I really like Gabriel Jesus and I don't really want to see him leave. The ideal scenario is that he comes back and scores 6 or 7 really important goals in the second half of the season that essentially get us over the line, and he's an Arsenal player and around to lift those trophies that he has played a major part in putting Arsenal in the right direction for. That do you get what I mean? Like that, him and Zinchenko, like these situations, they can't go on forever, right? Like Zinchenko is a classic example of a player that it just got to the point where we had to move him on, and he's gone out on loan. We're not going to get anything for him really, and that's a little bit disappointing and frustrating. But my ideal scenario would have been to see him essentially be a part of Arsenal winning their first major trophy in years, because he was a big part of steering us onto that right path, as is Jesus. But yeah. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk Mikel Merino. If you've got any questions, hold on to them. Just want to have this quick Mikel Merino discussion, and then we'll do the last section straight out of the chat box. So, yeah, lots to work through still. Let's do that now. Let's talk Mikel Merino. Mikel Merino. Banger song, and a banger of a player in front of goal anyway. Right, let's talk a little bit about Mikel Merino. And I guess the question I'm asking this morning, and I want to hear your thoughts from the live chat. I want your thoughts in the comment section if you're watching us back. I want to hear from you on Spotify, because you can put questions on Spotify and comments on Spotify these days. Have we misprofiled Mikel Merino? And I don't mean has Mikel Arteta and Arsenal misprofiled him, because they would have done way more research than you or I did. But have we misprofiled Mikel Merino? Because, I mean, watching that hat-trick last night, it was just incredible, wasn't it? To see this guy who, when he's picked in the starting 11, as he was at Anfield, just seemed to create so much discourse. How he then goes onto the international stage, plays in this unbelievable Spanish team, gets a start first and foremost, and then goes and scores a hat-trick away to Turkey. Does it just show you that when we as fans, and I'm talking generally here, doubt him, question him, have we got it all wrong? Is it just a case of the environment that he is in at Arsenal doesn't necessarily extract the very best from him? Because I think we can all agree. I think we can all agree that if you go back through Mikel Merino's very short Arsenal career to date, the most impressive period, the period when he was most valued by the fans, when he was most loved and wanted, was during that period where he was playing at centre forward. We all knew that we needed a proper centre forward, and we all knew that the club had probably dropped the ball in terms of the way that we'd recruited over the past couple of windows, and essentially putting us in a position where Mikel Merino was our centre forward. But I'm baffled by Merino, right? If you get him in the box and you get him in and around goal, he's shown himself to be a very, very good, very, very competent finisher. But anywhere else in the midfield, so in the build-up phase, when he drops that little bit deeper, he just doesn't look effective enough. He doesn't feel like a controller. He doesn't feel like a tempo setter. And he's definitely not a creator. He's a finisher. But it's really interesting because if you play with a midfielder who is predominantly a finisher, and he reminds me a little bit of Scott McTominay in that sense, then you need to make sure that you have the right structure around him, and your team has to be geared to essentially, accommodate that and then get the best out of him. And I don't think we are. We went to Anfield last week and he was in the starting 11, and people were saying, look at Arsenal. They've turned up with 3 defensive midfielders: Martin Zubimendi, Declan Rice, and Mikel Merino. First of all, Mikel Merino is not a bloody defensive midfielder. This has been one of the most irritating narratives that has developed over the past week or two. He is not a defensive midfielder. If Mikel Merino was a defensive midfielder, he wouldn't be in those positions that he's in to score so many goals, okay? Mikel Merino is an attack-minded player. He's not a defensively minded player. Then you looked at his heat map after the Liverpool game, and you could clearly see that he was taking up the most advanced positions of our midfielders. He was high and to the right, trying to play close to the winger. He was trying to get close to Victor Gyökeres at times. He wasn't sitting back behind the ball, and he wasn't sitting square or in line even with Rice or even Zubimendi for that matter. Mikel Merino's not a defensive midfield player, but his all-round game is missing something. His strength and his superpower is in his ability to box crash, to take up the right positions, to sense when there's an opportunity, and then to execute those opportunities that come his way. That is Mikel Merino's superpower. But that superpower is only something that will, really show itself when he's provided with the right environment. And so when I say, is he misprofiled? I'm kind of asking the question of, do we really understand what Mikel Merino is? And as a football team, when we play him, do we make the required adjustments and adaptations to extract Mikel Merino's superpower? And the answer's got to be no. If you play Mikel Merino in a team that has creativity, in a team where he's not expected to be part of the build-up necessarily, then it can work. For example, if you went to Liverpool the other day and you had Rice, Zubimendi, if you had Rice, what am I saying here? If you had a creator in the midfield alongside Merino, so that would be an Odegaard or an Eze, then you would have got more out of Merino, because Merino doesn't have to drop that bit deeper, doesn't have to get involved in the build-up as much, doesn't have to be played through. Instead, he can have the freedom to kind of drift, to ghost around, and to pop into those spaces at the right times, and then produce his superpower, which is finishing and taking those opportunities. It just felt like the midfield at Liverpool last weekend, it lacked creativity generally. And then Mikel Merino became the scapegoat because he was the one that most people would have left out. I would have left him out as well. So I'm not jumping on people that did that or said that. My point here is that Mikel Merino is a finisher. That's where he's been misprofiled. He's not an all-round midfield player. You're not going to build up through him. You're not going to use him to progress the ball through the thirds. He ain't going to do that stuff because that's not Mikel Merino's game. We brought him in as a left eight because we brought him in to kind of come in at that far post, to be that box crasher, to do all of those things. But that only works if the rest of your midfield is functional. And Arsenal in the past have tried to make that midfield functional and to let the left eight loose by saying to the left back, go inside. And that's freed up the left eight to get forward and to be sort of closer to those attacking areas and attacking zones. So it feels like the environment at Arsenal, you know, at times it's worked for Mikel Merino, but at times it hasn't. And I would argue that based on what we're seeing from Mikel Merino at an international level, where he scores goals for fun and makes it look really, really easy. We've seen him score goals at Arsenal playing as a centre forward, so we all know that he can finish and that he's capable. I know international football is different. Social says that international football is slower, different coach. De La Fuente is an attacking coach. Spain play attacking football. It's all coaching. I agree. I'm calling it environment. You're calling it coaching. Ultimately, the environment is influenced and impacted by the coaching, right? I'm just saying that in the right team, given the license to do the right things, Mikel Merino is a really, really effective player. We are either unaware of how to extract the maximum from Mikel Merino when he plays in midfield, or we're unwilling to do the things required to get the best out of him. It's one or the other. You know, don't look at Mikel Merino and expect him to be an Odegaard. Don't look at him and expect him to be an Eze. He's not going to be that. He's not going to be that at all. He's a bit like a Scott McTominay. He's a bit like a Frank Lampard used to be, in that they'll work hard and they'll always be committed to the cause, but ultimately their superpower is the way that they finish off moves and not what they offer in the creation of those moves or in the build-up. That's the big, big difference between how I think a lot of us look at Mikel Merino versus what he actually is. And so there is a useful player there, and there is a talented player there, and there is a player with a very specific superpower there. But we've got to, I think, know what we're watching and know what we're getting from Merino when we go into games, because otherwise we're assessing him in the wrong way. You know, we're coming away from a game and we're going, Mikel Merino didn't have that many touches and he didn't play that many progressive passes and he didn't make that many dribbles and he didn't provide an assist. That's not what he's on the pitch to do. That's not what he brings. So how do you manage him in a way that ensures you get those things out of him? That's the big question, isn't it? AFC Till I Die says, H, do you think that Arteta saw what Merino could do in training before the game against Turkey, and that's why he played him at Anfield? As I said, like the decision to play Merino at Anfield, I know not everybody would have made it. I wouldn't have made it myself personally, but it wasn't that wild. Like, it wasn't completely outside of the box or completely stupid. I didn't think anyway. I think that there was clearly an intention to go a little bit longer, to go a little bit more direct. And if you go back to the game at Old Trafford on the opening weekend of the season, our midfield was completely bypassed, wasn't it? Man United played over it and around it. And Zubimendi and Rice had very, very little influence in that game, particularly in the first half. I think Arsenal were trying to give Liverpool a bit of that medicine. I think Arsenal were trying to go over the top, and they figured that if, when the goalkeeper receives the ball or when you've got the ball at the back, Merino can get on his bike and try and get close to Gyökeres and become a second potential aerial duel winner, that would have worked. You leave that core of Zubimendi and Rice sitting that little bit deeper, and you push Merino up, who can be a striker, who can score goals, who can finish moves. You get him close to Gyökeres. He's an intelligent footballer, Mikel Merino. You get him in that final third where he can do damage. Then it makes sense. I think that's how Mikel looked at it. And honestly, my opinion is that had Kai Havertz been fit, Kai Havertz would have been the guy playing that role that day rather than Mikel Merino. But I think that was the tactical idea behind it. I don't think it was. I don't think Mikel watched his namesake, Mikel Merino, in training and thought, wow, he can do this, or learn anything new specifically about him. I just think he thought that for that game, with that plan, that made the most sense. But as I say, I maintain that I think that if Havertz was fit, he would have probably played there instead. What else have we got? Lloyd says Harry Merino is a DM. He played in a pivot with Zubi at Real Sociedad. Look at his numbers. 0 goals, more duels won than any midfielder in Europe. Yeah, but it's not unheard of for a manager to look at a player and think, you're playing this role, but I think you could play a different role for me, and go out and sign him. I'm not denying what he was in the past. I'm just saying that this idea, this narrative that we went to Anfield with 3 DMs when one of them is basically a ghost striker. And he shows that every single time he takes to the field, whether for his club or for his country. I just think is just a little bit inaccurate. Jay says he's done what he's needed to do, scored important goals to get us to the CL semi-finals, and that's the point of this chat. You should listen to Harry Mylands. I'm not going to say you should listen to me. You can if you wish, but yeah. Paul James says Spain build their team around their midfield. We built ours around our defense. It's a valid point. That's why they have an outstanding midfield and we have an outstanding defense. It's a good point. Good observation. Junior Gunner says, honest question, Harry, do you still enjoy watching our brand of football and get the same buzz on a match day compared to the 22-23 or 23-24 seasons? Honestly, no, I don't. But this is where I get annoyed and irritated, not with you, mate, but just in general with this whole like, oh, you won't criticize the manager thing and you won't say this and you won't say that. If I feel something, I will absolutely say it. I will say it in a respectful way because that's how I am. But like, I've not made any secret of the fact that I think that we're too pragmatic at times. I've made no secret of the fact that I feel like sometimes we play with the handbrake on, and it's just a different approach to what I like. I was watching some clips yesterday. They popped up on X of like all these like brilliant Arsenal goals under Wenger when we had sort of like Rosicki and Wilshere and Ozil and all these players in the mix, right? And you're seeing these one-touch, brilliant swashbuckling moves, and we're like moving the ball from our own goal to the back of the opposition's net in 4 or 5 passes, and it was brilliant. It was amazing to watch, and it did bring back some lovely memories. But then I thought about it, and while I was watching it, I was like, man, I long for this type of football again. Like, I really do. But then I thought to myself, but I don't miss the fact that whenever we went to Old Trafford or Anfield, we knew we were going to concede. I don't miss the fact that we used to go to places like Bolton and get bullied. I don't miss the fact that we used to go to Stoke and get bullied. So there's pros and cons, right? Arsenal being the defensive minded team that they are at times these days, particularly in the bigger games, the benefits are that we're competitive. The drawbacks are that it isn't as great to watch, and maybe at times we don't have enough to go and win these games because we're not brave enough to win these games. Those are the drawbacks. Mikel Arteta as a coach can go one route or the other. You can put an overemphasis on your attacking play, in which case the drawback is that you're potentially weaker defensively, or you can put a greater emphasis on your defensive play, which will in turn take away a little bit from your attack. As long as you get the results, I ain't fussed really what route you go down. The problem is right now that when we haven't won the trophies yet, there is always going to be that question about the style and the decisions he makes. And I question it as much as anybody else. I did a podcast last season where we talked about the fact that there was just no spontaneity in our attack anymore, and that Mikel Arteta's coaching, for me, as good as it was from a defensive point of view, had certainly impacted this. So my criticism of this, of the style of the brand of football and the impact that that's having, this goes back a long, long way. And that's why I get irritated when people go, oh, well, look, he'll never criticize Mikel. I've been criticizing anyone involved in Arsenal Football Club who I don't agree with for a long, long time. Just because I don't do it in the same way as others do it, it doesn't mean it's not criticism. Anyway, what else have we got? Mark, thank you so much, mate, for your very, very kind super chat donation. He says, Harry, if we win the League Cup and the FA Cup, finish second by 1 or 2 points and lose the Champions League final, is that still a successful season? I don't know, Mark. I can't answer that right now because you got to see how it all pans out and plays out. But look, if we win the cups, then people will say, yeah, success because we've won trophies. I think for me, those trophies are easier to win than the league or the Champions League. So, they would fall sort of towards the bottom of my list if I'm sort of ranking the magnitude of any potential achievements that we could have this season. But we need silverware because people need to stop, applying pressure based on us not winning a league or an FA Cup. That's not what we've been building for. We've been building for a league and a Champions League win. That's what we've been building for, in my opinion. But yeah, we'll see. But it's a really interesting question. Like, if we're competitive for the league and we pick up some silverware, then deep down there'll be a part of me that it won't be totally satisfied, but I'll be content with that. I wouldn't be calling for Mikel to be sacked if we won the League Cup and FA Cup, finished second by 1 or 2 points and made it to a Champions League final. Absolutely wouldn't. So then I guess you could say that means it's a good enough season in my book. Nase Bonsu says, it's not one or the other, just regards to my comments previously. He says, we can still play nice football and be defensively solid. There isn't any drawbacks. No, that balance between being swashbuckling, super creative, super offensive minded teams, without leaving yourselves vulnerable, that balance does not exist. You will always lean one way or the other. One way or the other. You might go 60% one way, 40% the other. You might go 55%, 45%. You might go 51%, 49%. There's different sort of levels of how you manage that balance. But I think that's partly down to the players that you have as well and what their natural mindset is. And I think that you can drill stuff in as a coach, but if their mindset naturally goes one way or the other, I think that has an impact as well. But you can't be 100% as defensively solid as you possibly can be while being as effective going forward to that same level at the same time. It's impossible. Because in order to be super offensive and to be impactful offensively, you need to take risks. And if you take those risks, it goes against you being as potentially solid defensively. So you that balance, for me personally, just my opinion, it doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. Okay, I am going to leave it there. There's so many good questions coming through, though. I've got a dash. I've got a call at 11:15, which is annoying. If I'd have known that today's pod was going to pop off the way it did, I would have done something a little bit differently. But anyway, let's revisit this stuff. Get into the comment section, not the live chat. Get into the comment section and leave your questions, and we can pick some of them up on the next episode. I think some really, really interesting debates. So yeah, looking forward to it. PSG, let me just address this. Paul James says PSG showed you can be a wonderful attacking side and defensively sound. They did it, beating us twice. He also says, to be fair, Harry, PSG managed to pull it off. I would argue that PSG are not as good as us defensively. Offensively, they're much better than us. Defensively, they're not quite at our level. In order for us to get to their level offensively, we need to have different players in attack. Hopefully those players we've signed are going to be those players over the course of this year. But also, we don't take the level of risk that PSG do in terms of how high we press in certain games. And that has a positive impact in our defensive capability, but it takes away from our offensive capability. Their balance is not perfect. No one's balance is perfect. Because for me personally, the perfect balance does not exist. You won't find that perfect balance. You either take more risk defensively in order to increase your effectiveness offensively, or you do it the other way around. But you're never going to be 50-50. It just doesn't work. I don't think. Anyway. Okay. I'll catch you all soon. Thank you so much. Don't forget to leave a like on the way out. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Thanks for tuning in. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, leave us a review. Check us out on Patreon as well. And I'll see you all on the next one. Until then, take care of yourselves and have a wonderful Monday. Up the Arsenal. Goodbye.